You are with the big story here. I'm Seher Zama. In the top focus, findings. And these are disturbing findings of a report on the status of policing in India. This report having been prepared by the NGO Common Cause in partnership with the CSDS, which is the Center for the Study of Developing Societies. It has interviewed about 35% of police personnel across the country. Out of those, half of the police personnel in India feel that Muslims are somewhat or more prone to crime. The survey has revealed that 35% of police personnel who were interviewed here think that it is natural for a mob to go violent and natural for a mob to punish culprits in cases of alleged cow slaughter. 43% of this lot feel that it is natural for a mob to punish someone accused of rape. 72% of these surveyed claim that they have experienced political pressure during investigation of cases involving influential people. This survey was conducted across 21 states. There were about 12,000 police officials who were interviewed in police stations. 11,000 of their family members were interviewed as well. There are several findings here of this study, but most indicative here being with respect to mob violence, the increase in the cases of lynching and what the police feels about this. Do they look at this as mob violence or do they look at this as mob justice? Let's get in further details. Our correspondent, my colleague Tanima, getting us further inputs here in this 118-page report that has been prepared on this survey.
That's right, Sarah, as you were mentioning, that some of the key findings are really startling, and the point which comes out essentially is, and which has in fact been emphasized earlier as well, as to whether or not there needs to be more sustained training given to police officials, whether there needs to be some sort of considerable police reforms when it comes to sensitizing police officials and when they're handling cases like this, especially over the past few years that we have seen that there have been a number of incidents, as you were rightly pointing out, that the report focuses on incidents of mob justice or mob violence, and whether or not what is the aptitude that the police officials or police personnel, different ranks of police personnel have of course been interviewed in this survey. What exactly is their aptitude when it comes to these incidents? And as we know that a large number of them, actually 35% of them, felt that in cases of cow slaughter such kind of mob violence is justified, and 43% felt that in cases of rape or sexual assault that such incidents are in a way can be understood that if the accused is being beaten up. So this is of course a very worrying trend, and also when it comes to focusing on the minority communities who are allegedly involved in some of these incidents, the attitude that the police officials hold is something which comes across out as a worrying trend in this report. In fact, if we remind our viewers that even last year...
Tanima, stay with us, Tanima, please, because we're getting in a word here from the CSDS, the director of the CSDS, which has conducted this survey in partnership with the Common Cause NGO, Mr. Sanjay Kumar, with us. Mr. Sanjay Kumar, appreciate you being with us here. Now, these are very disturbing findings of this report here, but does it largely indicate the reason why cases of lynching, cases of mob violence not be taken seriously by the police? Because many of them that you've interviewed in this survey feel that it is a form of natural justice. It's okay for the mob to go violent.
To be very frank, the survey is not an instrument to capture, and we have not been able to capture why people or policemen may be thinking like that why 32% or 33% policemen are ready to justify that in cases like cow slaughter, it is all right for the mob to, go to try and punish whom they think is a culprit. But I think if you look at the other findings from the survey, which clearly indicate that these policemen are not working in a very healthy or a very pleasant situation. There are they have one basic difficulty is that there is a lack of training. Most of the policemen actually undergone training at the time of joining the service, which is as old as maybe say 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. During last 2 or 3 years, only 5 to 7% policemen have undergone any kind of a training. So I think lack of training, lack of sensitization on the issues of how sensitive you should be or policemen should be with regard to dealing with people from lower sections of the society. I think that can change the attitude. There is a lack of training component in about people in the service, and that I think has caused this kind of a thinking among large number of policemen in the police force at the moment.
Mr. Kumar, please stay on with us. We also have Director of the Common Cause NGO, which has done this survey along with the CSDS, Mr. Vipul Mudgal, with us over the phone line. Mr. Mudgal, thanks for being with us. The larger findings, the conclusion that one could take, the inference from the study here being that there is a certain bent of mind of police officials that have been interviewed, spoken to in this survey, in a sense that it is all right for a mob to be attacking a certain community or to be attacking a certain person in cases of rape, in cases of cow vigilantism, and this goes entirely against what the police is meant for, to maintain law and order, to make sure that things are happening in accordance to law and not just some kangaroo court form of mob violence.
Yeah, I think that they have a bit of contempt for legal trials. I think it's very common. The questions were asked very indirectly in the survey. There is a danger if you ask a very direct question and you say that, are you going to give law to the mobs? They'll say, no, we will not, So you have to ask very indirect questions. Softly you have to ask questions. Sometimes you ask them a very benign question like, say, if there is a road accident, and it seems that it is because of the mistake of the driver. So is it okay for the people to kill the driver there or to punish the driver then and there? Then a lot of cops would say, yes, it is quite all right, if it is the mistake of the guy. So you actually realize that there is a severe lack of training, and particularly in areas of what Constitution stands for. If you ask cops, according to me, who do you work for? I think they'll be at a loss. They wouldn't know who they work for. The fact is that they work for the rule of law. They are part of the most important part, the bedrock.
Right. So, Dr. Mudgal, if we look at the recent Pehlu Khan case here, where the sense largely was that all accused were acquitted for lack of evidence, the police, which was in 2017, which is of the previous dispensation in the state of Rajasthan, had weakened the case to have caused the acquittal of the accused. So if this is the belief with which you have police personnel going ahead and saying it was fine for the mob to attack someone who was only suspicious of carrying cows to get them slaughtered, it's all right for him to have been punished and beaten to death there and then, let the accused be set free.
That is true, but you see, the fact is that this is not something entirely new. I mean, it's like, I'm not saying that the present dispensation is not responsible for taking the hate speech to a completely new level. Definitely they've done it. But you see, this is something which has been going on for a long time. It was building up for, say, 10, 15, 20 years. Not because everybody before this government wanted, cows, vigilantism and things like that, but the fact is that they've somehow wanted the police to work for the rulers of the day. They wanted police to work as private armies of politicians. So in that sense, they were not provided autonomy to work and the degree of professionalism which was required in a country like India. So when things became like more difficult, with cow vigilantism increasing in this country, then it's like one thing leads to another. We had a severe crisis right now. But this is a neglect which is going on for a very long time.
And Mr. Sanjay Kumar, this is not just pertaining to cow vigilantism, which is a form of mob violence. This is across the board in cases of lynching. We're seeing an increase in frequency of the cases of lynching. We're reporting an average of 2 cases across the country of people being lynched on suspicion of being thieves, on suspicion of going ahead to carry cow slaughter, on suspicion of being child pickers. And if this is how the police feels, this probably explains why there is a rise in cases of lynching across the country then.
You're right. If you connect the two things, one, the data which is coming out from the survey, the opinions of the police on these issues, and what we see happening across the country every day. So you can see the connection. Why do we see a rise in such cases? Because the fear of police is going down, and the willingness of the policemen, people who are working with the police force, to punish those or to take this culprit to the or to try and trial them as per law. That notion is missing, because they think if 32% of them policemen believe that it is all right for the mob to do that, then then what you see, that the rising trend is explained by this mentality that if policemen are willing to accept this as a norm, then you would see such trend rising even in future. And that this is a very disturbing trend coming out from the survey and what we see happening across the country.
Please stay with us. We're going to be getting in more voices here, former voices from the police force here as well, on what they feel about this very disturbing trend here. But Mr. Mudgal, as is being explained here as the huge takeaway from this survey, this is a considerable number of police personnel who've been interviewed, spoken with across the country, not just a small pocket, but this is effectively across the country. Their families have been spoken with about this as well. What has been the findings with respect to families of police personnel being spoken about this?
You see, the family members have been saying that they are fatigued, they are exasperated, they are overworked, and they are vulnerable to mental diseases. There are all kinds of problems, and many people said that their relatives or husbands or fathers are likely to be irritated at very small things. And then you connect it and you see that how many hours they work. It's common for them to work for 16 hours, 17 hours. 25% people are working for more than 16 hours, and in some states for 18 hours. And the
That's
pattern
right.
is...
No, Dr. Mudgal, stress at work is understandable, but to be justifying the acts of a mob, to be justifying mob violence, that is entirely something else. That cannot be connected to stress. That is very clearly with respect to a bent of mind. There is lack of training, lack of sensitization, lack of sense that you're part of a police force and not part of a mob. Let's get in a word here from Mr. A.L. Banerjee, former DGP of Uttar Pradesh, with us on the phone line. Mr. Banerjee, what do you have to say about the findings here of this study? 35% of the police force of the country which has been spoken to, half of them feel that it is okay for a mob to get violent. It is okay if a mob decides to lynch a person on suspicion of cow theft or rape.
You see, in the morning I read the news item where it said that 72% of the cops experience political pressure in probe involving influential people, and it also said that 50% of cops feel Muslims naturally prone to crime. That's a survey, and this is the second survey done by these people, and it also said that they have done it in 21 states, spread across interviewing about 12,000 police personnel and 11,000 of their family members. Now, that does not make 50% of the police force, does it? This has been done by the CSDS.
No, it doesn't. I very specifically said 50% of 35% of those interviewed. That is still a considerable number, Mr. Banerjee.
No, I have to, please. You ask me a question. Either you let me speak or you don't let me speak. One of the things. Now, this has been done by the CSDS locally.
So I didn't say 50%.
And they say that it is a report of about 200 pages. Now, it is not very clear what are the questions they asked. You see, questions can be tweaked. It can be said, do you think that so-and-so, such and such community, behaves in such and such fashion? Obviously, you're going to get answers of that kind. So, this is not a fair survey. For it to be a fair
all right,
survey,
so Mr. Banerjee, leave the community aside. I'm not even talking about one particular community or how the police force feels that the Muslims can be prone to a certain crime. I'm not talking about any community here. The very fact that you have a considerable number of police officials saying that mob violence is justified. What do you have to say about that?
To fear the police. You see, the point is that it is not only the police reforms which is important. They should also have done whether the criminal justice system is responding or not. The criminal justice system is a thing which also is, police is part of that. There are other things, the courts, the prosecution. Why aren't all these things taken into account? Until as you take that also into account, just by saying that the police believes in this, the police does this, is not going to get you any results. So what I'm saying is that this is an incomplete report, though, however, this does point out our shortcomings, and we should sit down, put our heads together, and decide and discuss as to what best can be done about this.
Okay. Please stay with us, Mr. Banerjee. Mr. Sanjay Kumar, please respond to that. The findings of your survey are misleading, incorrect, and your report is incomplete, is what Mr. Banerjee has had to say about this.
I would just try and respond to some of the factual questions first. The report has a copy of the questionnaire attached at the back. So you can look at the copy of the questionnaire, how the questions were framed. I do agree that you changed the questionnaire and the responses could be very, very different. We did take a lot of care in designing these questionnaires. These were not designed overnight. The questions were designed with a very careful thought. These questions were tested. And when we do the interview across 21 states, these questions were actually translated in different languages. So we did try and take absolute care in designing, implementing the survey, but still these are figures. You can challenge these figures, you can quarrel with these figures. And we never said that 12,000 policemen constitutes 50% of the policemen. We have conducted interviews among 12,000 policemen, and we said and we are considering this as a representative of the entire police force. And we said among these 12,000 policemen, these many say this, these many people, these many policemen have these kind of an opinion. So yes, people have every right to, question these findings, but also the point which you mentioned that we have to look at the findings of different questions. We should not be just picking up one slice and just, paint a picture of how the police force work in this country. There are sections in the report which talks about the difficult situation under which the Indian police force work. The condition, the basic facilities are not available. Drinking water, stationery is not available. The vehicle is not available. Telephone lines are not available. So these are also the conditions.
Okay, these are working conditions, of course, that you've mentioned earlier. But working conditions cannot explain on why a certain police official would have a certain bent of mind. A certain police official would want to justify the act of a mob, which is violent, which is to the extent of a victim being lynched and murdered. Mr. Mudgal, if you could respond, if you could step in here on this, and with respect to reactions that the findings of your report will receive. Now, you would say that this is for the larger good. This is to bring about reforms in the system. This is to sensitize police personnel. This is to bring about annual training of police officials who've not received it for the past 10 years, as you mentioned. But if it's not taken in the right spirit, we cannot be expecting reforms to take in place.
Yeah, you see, I think the police officers, I've been talking to a lot of them. In fact, last report we did, we had interactions with almost 150, or in one, 2 sessions with BPRD, and another 2 sessions with another 50, 60 IPS officers. And it was very good result. I mean, when you read and talk, it is very different when you rather than when you read a news report and respond. The police officers don't have to become defensive about it. And also, the police reforms is not the issue.
Please stay with us. We also getting in Justice Saldana with us over the phone line. Appreciate you being with us, sir. This is with respect to the holistic justice system and how the police works here. Are some of the findings of this survey disturbing? Are they disturbing to you, or do you think they're misleading?
Well, I'll say it's a little unfortunate. You've got to probably realize that the police officers, much more than us. Now, both as a lawyer and as a judge, I had some level of exposure, but I didn't do any research or study beyond that. But the police officers are in touch with the day-to-day situation. And over a period of time, I think they form certain opinions. It may be unfortunate, but those opinions may be representative of the situation, because if you go into some of the pockets, particularly the poverty-stricken areas, where you find that there are a very large number of children who do not have, they do not have a right source of livelihood, neither do they have any education. The result is that, the street culture usually deteriorates into a situation of crime. And once it starts, there's nothing to sort of reverse it. And that is the reason why I have been told many times, even in the courtroom, I know, by some of the police officers, saying that there's a natural tendency among certain communities to be drawn towards the life of crime, etc. But I think the reason for it is really that it starts at a level of poverty and ignorance. But there may be some justification, because
Justice Saldana, a certain strata of society to be driven towards committing crime is very different from police officials feeling that mob violence in certain cases is justified. What explains that? These are two very different things.
Well, Madam, there are different forms of crime, you see, and what happens is, if you have a criminal bent of mind, then you would more easily be given to violence, and at that time there's no reasoning with regard to what you are doing, or the cause, or the justification. I think that's the reason why many of the police officers. I do agree that something needs to be done in order to correct this. But the police officers say there's
absolutely. One cannot have police officers thinking like members of a mob, indulging in violence. Stay with us, please. Also getting in a word here from social activist Mr. Firoz Mithi Borowala with us. Thank you for being with us, Mr. Firoz. How damaging do you feel are these findings for society, for people watching this, thinking that police is working for the larger good?
No, I'm extremely shocked, actually. I mean, we knew things are bad, but to the extent that even the policing on lines of certain, the way a polarized society, where the police thinks that Muslims are prone to crime and mob lynching is justified in certain cases, and all is beyond bizarre in a democracy that we claim to be. And it requires far more work than we thought of. It requires a lot of effort on the terms of on part of civil society, and a dialogue between the police, a larger dialogue between the police and the Muslim community, which is ongoing. But the kind of dialogue that we've had until now seems not to have done much to actually contain the kind of situation, the dire situation that we are facing.
All right, we'll have to leave it at that. Appreciate all the voices having spoken to us, our correspondent Tanama as well, giving us those details here. And here's the operative bit of what comes in as a conclusion in one of the chapters of this report here, that the police has not been able to rise above societal prejudice. What good is your training if you continue to behave along the lines of societal prejudice, if you continue to feel that the mob acting in violence, the mob lynching a person is justified? That is terribly horrifying to be living in a society where a police force tends to feel that way. Thank you for being here.